Order. Just before we proceed, I just very gently say to the Secretary of State, on a one-to-one basis, I always think he's a very civil fellow, but it is a considerable discourtesy, or incompetent, or both, for a Secretary of State to take twice the length of time that is allocated for answering an urgent question. If the right honourable gentleman judges that he's got more material that he wishes to share with the House, which of itself could be very helpful, that's fine. But the implication of that is blindingly obvious, and that is that the right honourable gentleman should offer to deliver an oral statement to the House of up to 10 minutes. What he should not do is fail to communicate with me in advance, ignore the convention, and greatly exceed his allotted time. It is, I'm afraid, discourteous and incompetent, and it must not happen again. Mr. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we would have welcomed a statement from the Minister. Today does bring more devastating news for British steel workers in Cambuslang, Motherwell and Scunthorpe, and concerns for workers employed by Caparo, following on from the devastating news of the hard closure of Redcar last week. And can I, on behalf of this side, pass on our solidarity with the individuals, their trade union, families and communities that have been affected, and ask the Government to do all that it can to work with every agency and jurisdiction to support those affected. And can I just say to the Secretary of State, it doesn't help him continuing the spin about the £80 million. The Minister admitted last week that it's £50 million, and even that's questionable. Spinning doesn't help the workers one little bit. And Mr. Speaker, can I say to the Secretary of State, we on this side all understand the very real and difficult problems that are facing the steel industry, and some of us have worked ourselves in the steel industry or have family in it and know about the heat of the steel plant. We know about the whiff of the coke ovens. We understand all too well that the industry is facing huge challenges, not least as a result of not being allowed to operate on a level playing field. No one's trying to minimise the challenges that are being faced. But what we can't understand, Mr. Speaker, is why ministers don't appear to even have a view on what represents a minimum credible steel-making capacity in Britain's long-term strategic interest. The overwhelming impression given by the Secretary of State and his colleagues is that despite their high-flown rhetoric about northern powerhouses and the march of the makers, they seem content to allow Britain's entire steel-making capacity to disappear in the face of blatant Chinese dumping. Can he tell the House? Can we tell the House, and we need a direct answer to this from him if the Minister will stop chuntering, does he believe that the price of Chinese steel being dumped on our shores reflects the true cost of producing it? And if not, what's he doing about it? Even if the workers producing steel plate at Scunthorpe offered to work for nothing, that Chinese price could not be matched. And while the Chinese President is riding down the Mall in a gilded state coach, British workers are being laid off because our government's not standing up for them. What's he doing to ensure there's a level playing field or the British steel industry can have a future? Will he now immediately implement the 5 emergency actions the industry has called for at the Steel Summit? He mentioned 3 things. I have a fear they may be too little too late, Mr. Speaker, in his statement today. But will he immediately implement the 5 emergency actions the industry has called for? And why has the Secretary of State been so reluctant up until now to defend the British steel industry during this crisis when it's so important to our strategic national interests? So can he tell us now, does the Government even have a position on what represents the minimal credible steel-making capacity in Britain's strategic interests? And if it does, what is it? And finally, despite his well-advertised laissez-faire views, will he now reverse his refusal to even accept that the Government needs an industrial strategy and stand up for Britain?